Hello, episode 16. My goodness, that's a lot of episodes. For those of you who've actually watched all 15 before this one, I really appreciate it. Thanks for sticking with me on this. It means a lot. For those of you who just randomly clicked on this video because it popped up in your feed or however you got things set up on YouTube, go back and watch the first 14, 15. As I just said, I do know how to count. I do. Go back and watch them. See how much God has done. See how much God allowed me to trip all over myself and make a bunch of gazillion bad decisions and bad choices in my life that opened up a world of hurt and unnecessary pain in my life. But how He overruled them. How He allowed me to get the help I needed for the mental health issues that I was struggling with. So we're going right here. We're jumping into this. Last time in episode 15, I talked about how Mark had come back into my life and how the irony is not lost on me that I left Jake originally. I moved out of his apartment because I wanted to get away from his terrible influence. But yet, Mark's influence was beyond extreme. At this point in his life, Mark was into some seriously wicked stuff I will never talk about because it's too gross, and frankly, I don't want to think about it. Because Jake's vices, nursery school. What Mark exposed me to, incomparable, awful. Mark also returned to me as a violent alcoholic. I mean, sure, when it was just Mark, Jake, and I still hanging out together, we would drink some beer, hang out, maybe a shot or two. But now Mark is drinking this disgusting, cheap vodka that you basically call it turpentine passing for vodka. He's drinking them out of these, plastic liter-sized jugs. It was just so gross. And he poured in his coffee cup in the morning instead of coffee and just drinks straight gross vodka like it was water. Very gross. For some reason, he never threw these empty bottles away. He just would toss them into his closet until they would eventually spill out into his room all over the floor because the closet's overflowing. I don't know if he was embarrassed and didn't want the neighbors to know how much of a pathetic drunk he was, but there's always these disgusting empty jugs in his room. It's so gross. I don't know what happened to him in that time that Jake and I lost, contact with Mark, but whatever did happen, it shorted out his brain. I do know he spent some time in prison, so maybe that was the culprit. Because when Mark left, he was a super gentle and considerate guy. I remember so many times hanging out with him, just the two of us, at his mom's apartment, just laughing and talking and telling stories and playing video games. It was just amazing fun. But when Mark returned from wherever he went, his mom wanted nothing to do with him anymore. She's like, "You're not living in my apartment until you get yourself squared away." So, because I needed a roommate and Mark needed a room, that's when I said, fine, move in. But the problem is, this dude, he carried with him a darkness that was just super uncomfortable to be around. It was almost like he was possessed. We're just going to say that. It's basically he was possessed. Because I used to thoroughly enjoy hanging out with him because he was mentally broken like me. He was just compassionate and sacrificial and giving. I didn't realize what he turned into until he moved in. He kept up his nice facade. And I just figured, hey, I'm getting the fun-loving, laid-back Mark. Nah. Well, apparently somebody killed that Mark. What was left was just pure evil. I want to return to the horrors and the freak show that Mark was and what he put me through in a little bit. I want to just quickly touch on another key event that was happening at the same time in my life that will eventually, it's laying the groundwork, as I do in most of these stories. I tell these little events that keep coming and more gets built on this. So what I'm about to tell you, if I didn't have this event, it never would have ushered in the ultimate event, which was the ultimate event that eventually brought me home. So let me get going here on this. I talked about the valet gig I had at this crazy upscale mall where I was meeting Broncos players and parking Ferraris and all this other crazy stuff. Because I'd done such a good enough job there and I had no complaints, it became like my consistent regular gig. I was there more than any other of the employees of this valet company. So it basically became a route for me. And, because I was there all the time, I became like this permanent fixture at the mall. I started meeting a bunch of new people and becoming friends and regulars and all that, because this was 1999 after all. The mall still held sway over people, especially teenagers. This was the hangout spot. It was the movie Mallrats, if you've ever seen that. That's what this place was. So, because all these people are rich and driving Ferraris and all this other crazy stuff, the kids that hung out there were the offspring of all these rich people. I never had to go shopping for drugs anywhere else. This mall became my drug spot because these kids that were hanging out there were always selling me pot. Some of them worked at the mall. I think it was more just as a front to keep their parents off them and maybe explain why they're carrying all this money in their pockets, but whatever. These kids were selling me drugs. You could buy anything at this mall. There were so many drugs coming through this mall. It was crazy. The thing is, it wasn't just at the malls hanging out with these kids. I was hanging out with them after work because they were inviting me to all their house parties, and because they're clueless and completely uninvolved parents were out of town, and they thought, there's no way my sweet little Chloe or Braxton would throw a party when I'm not there. No, my kids are sweet kids. But no, these houses, they're massive, so the parties were massive. It was just bursting at the seams with partying kids, and these kids were hiring DJs to provide live music. And since these beautiful McMansions are in beautiful neighborhoods, rich neighborhoods, cops were always getting called. So I run through my fair share of backyards as cops were crashing the parties and chasing everybody away. It was just utter lunacy. Problem is, sadly, my debauched life at this time, it was on the verge of ticking it up a notch. I was absolutely on the precipice of doing a nosedive into the chasm of total depravity. And this depravity, this nosedive, it was coming in about a month. One more quick story about the mall before I get back to Mark and wrap this story up. I'm valeting. It's nighttime. It's super cold. It's slow. Probably the middle of the week, Tuesday or Wednesday, one of those days. Basically, there's just not a lot of people needing their car parked that night. So I'm hanging out in my little heated valet booth trying to keep warm. And because this is 1999, phones are flip phones. They're not phones that are basically TVs and computers in your pockets anymore. So I'm bored out of my mind. I've already read through the newspaper twice. I've already read the comics. I'm just kind of staring off into space out the window when I notice coming towards one of the entrances, a woman walking a ferret on a leash. She was literally about to walk this ferret into the mall with her. This was so hilarious to me and so Denver. I also noticed she was pretty attractive. Now, not even 2 years ago would I have ever had the courage to go up and talk to a girl that I thought was pretty. But because my mind was so completely altered and wrecked by pot, I had no fear anymore. I don't know. Nothing. I wasn't afraid of anything. I would talk to anybody. I didn't care who it was. So I approached her. I just totally started chatting her up. I told her I loved her ferret. So she starts telling me, well, I'm in the Navy and I'm about to be shipped out. I can't take my little dude with me. I'm like, oh man, that's so sad. So she says, you want him? I thought, yeah, I'll take your ferret. That'd be amazing. So we agreed on a time and a place the next couple days. We'd meet up and she'd give me her ferret. This happened. She showed up. I have a ferret. I'm carrying a ferret to my car, which I put in my passenger seat and drive the little dude home. So back to Mark, okay? When Mark moved in, he brought his ridiculously intelligent, funny little dog with him. I love this dog. Even though I was more of a cat person than a dog, this dog basically acted like a cat. So I just had a lot of fun with this dog. This dog was super well trained because Mark has this incredible gift at training animals. He loved animals, which was another thing that we connected on because I am a huge animal lover. So this was a bond that made our friendship even tighter because we just loved animals. I also knew that when Mark was a teenager that he had 3 of his own ferrets. He loved ferrets. So I knew he'd be excited to have our ferret again. Plus, I didn't know anything about taking care of a ferret or let alone training it. So Mark could pretty much take over this whole thing for me. Be great. So here we are, 2 guys, a dog, and a ferret all living in the same apartment. This was a sitcom waiting to happen. And let me tell you, the absurdity that would go on in this apartment for the next month and a half, 2 months, these stories wrote themselves. First month with Mark was okay. First couple of weeks, however, it was all right. It was, I could see that he was a little damaged. The time was uneventful. I sensed he was drinking too much, but he didn't unleash the crazy on me yet. He was still kind of keeping it under wrap, keeping under locked gate that it was in. So the problem is, though, Christmas Eve rolled around and Mark just really wanted to do something different. Okay. I was always in Denver for Christmas time. I never made it home for Christmas. So this wasn't really that big of a deal for me, but I was starting to feel a little homesick at this point. Cause like I said, things are starting to wind down in my mind. I'm thinking I'm gonna give one last run at this whole making Denver work. But so when Mark, said, come on, let's not do just pot and beer. Let's get something else. Let's try a different drug. I was a little nervous about this because apart from the one time of doing mushrooms with Jake, it was only ever pot. I didn't want to jump into the nastier side of drugs. I knew Mark had, because Mark had walked down that road a few years ago. I had told you a different story that, Mark's dad had hung himself when Mark was 16. And I'm pretty confident that this one event is a lot of the reason why Mark was carrying all these mental problems, because he adored his dad. But when Mark turned 18, he inherited the $200,000 that was his. And he blew most of it on drugs, and most of that drug was cocaine. Mark had became a total cokehead. He was an absolute burnout. Thousands and thousands of dollars went up this dude's nose. He had to go to rehab to get himself squared away. So I'm thinking he wants to play with that mess again. And I don't want to do that. So I'm like, let's try mushrooms. He thought about it. I was like, okay, because he really didn't know anything about mushrooms. Like, all right, I'll try that. So I'm not going into the details, as I've said, but suffice to say, this second time was infinitely better than the first time because I knew what to expect this time. So I reacted accordingly to the situation. Night's rolling on, about 5 hours into Christmas Eve. Mark and I are starting to come down a bit. And we're like, let's finish this night off at a bar. All right, I'm okay with that, I guess. So we go looking for a bar that's going to be open at basically 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve night. Big surprise, only bar is open that we could come across with a total dive, disgusting bar. We walk into this bar, and I'm telling you right now, that scene that greeted me when we walked in that door, it is burned permanently in my subconscious. I will never forget. It was a disgusting, barely above ghetto bar that was unnecessarily packed for 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve night. I'm looking at the bar that I'm bellied up to, gross and disgusting. I see this poor, passed out wino, his head just laying on the bar. I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? So I'm looking around. I'm taking note of all the other sad, pathetic drunks that are here instead of being home with families on Christmas night. I'm feeling sad for them and, oh, these poor people. And then it hits me like a ton of bricks. I'm one of these sad, pathetic, loser drunks at the bar. Only I'm also on mushrooms too. I don't know how many of these guys are on mushrooms, but it's like, who am I to judge these poor people? Well, like the tail end of my one and only mushroom time with Jake, this kind of symbolic door started to open up for me with Mark. So at this bar, with Jake, it was, I need to leave Jake. This time at the bar, it's, I need to leave Denver, period. I need to get home. It's time for me to go. Though I did not catch the significance of this moment right then and there, I did start to realize for the first time ever that I was living in a pig pen. And in fact, when I got home, it really dawned on me that my entire trip of Denver was basically the prodigal son journey. If you know what the prodigal son journey is, just Google Prodigal Son Bible, and what pops up, read it, okay? So I decided, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I'm moving back home this year. I am not spending one more Christmas in Denver. It's time for me to go home. But I didn't know how I was going to pull this off. I definitely didn't know when. I just knew I never wanted to spend another Christmas like this again. Problem is, this is all well and good. I've purposed in my mind it's time to go home, but God knew that I needed to drown in my vile, disgusting life before I was completely ready to leave it all behind. He knew that I had to come to the absolute end of myself before any of this would stick. I needed to be humble to the point that in my mind, I needed to see that either I go home or I stay in Denver and either die or at the very least be homeless. It was time to go. Well, the very first event that would kick off proving to me that I am making the right decision and it's time to go home, this would come knocking at my door literally on New Year's Day night. I would open up this door literally, and what I saw opened up the chaos that was about to completely dominate the final 9 months of my time in Denver. Next time I'll tell you what I saw when I opened up that door, because it was life-changing. All right, I want to read you 3 quick verses, touch on them a little bit, and wrap this up. Matthew 11, 28, 29, and 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is talking about Jesus. Jesus is calling us, calling all of us, calling you. He's called me already. He's calling us to come to him. We all carry the burden of being stuck in this body, in this world, in this life. The burden of living in this life is massive. Okay? It's hard. Nobody's going to deny that. You don't have to be a sad, pathetic drunk like I ran into at the bar. You could be a filthy rich actor, business owner, athlete. It doesn't matter. If you are honest with yourself and you are willing to look inside and realize that there is this emptiness inside you that you're constantly trying to fill with everything else, I'm telling you, Jesus wants to take all of that away, put his tiny little bitty yoke, the yoke that comes with being a born-again Christian in this life, and he wants to teach you, and he wants to show you that it is so much easier. We all carry a yoke, whether you want to admit it or not. We all are burdened. We are all trying to fill this hole that we are born with. We are trying to fill it with anything and everything. But the only thing that completely and perfectly and appropriately fills that hole is Jesus. I keep telling you this, and I'm not going to stop. Go to my website, look at the links, and see what it is that I'm talking about, what this Jesus person is, who he is, what he has done for us, what he's done for you, what we need to do for him. Read it. Read Matthew 11. Read all of Matthew. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're all talking about Jesus. There are 4 books in the Bible all centered around the person of Jesus. Don't ignore it any longer. His yoke is easy and light. And the added benefit of taking his yoke upon your shoulders, getting the other yoke off, which is massive and unbearable, you find rest in your souls. That peace that we all are searching for, it's there. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me pour my heart out at you. Thanks for watching this. Come back and see what is there when this door to this gross apartment I'm living in. See what's standing there. All right. Until then, keep pressing on.